Hello to everyone and welcome to our webinar on how to transform voter registration in Indian country through NVRA designation. This webinar is hosted by the National Congress of American Indians, the Native American Rights Fund, DEMOS, and the Native Organizers Alliance, who are united through the Native American Voting Rights Coalition. My name is Jacqueline De Leon. I'm an Isleta Pueblo, and I'm a senior attorney with the Native American Rights Fund, and I lead our voting rights work. I'm so pleased to be here today to moderate our discussion with our impressive panelists. First, I'm going to provide a little bit of background on what we're talking about today. The National Voter Registration Act, also known as the NVRA, is a law passed in 1993, and it revolutionized voter registration across America. Many people are aware that places like the DMV offer registration. And in fact, that is where most Americans get registered. What the NVRA did was it required that agencies like the DMV be designated as a national voter registration site and required those designated sites to offer robust registration services. And it worked. It turns out that when you have a transaction that you care about and are already filling out paperwork, like applying for a license or public assistance, you're already in the mindset to fill out forms. And many people go ahead and register. So NVRA designation has proved to be wildly successful. However, as we all well know, unfortunately, those registration services all too often do not reach Native Americans. Native Americans face multiple barriers to voter registration that are not faced by other Americans. Native Americans are less likely than other Americans to be registered to vote at DMVs or social service agencies, since they're less likely to have a license, and federal programs fulfill the government's treaty obligations and may replace state-run assistance. State agencies are often far, at times 50+ miles from reservation communities, and many natives may not have access to a vehicle, and a license may not be a priority. Moreover, the long history of formal disenfranchisement, the legacy of colonization, and present-day racism and hostility continue to prevent many Native Americans from registering and voting. Poor roads, poverty, and lack of vehicle access make it even harder to reach voter registration sites that are often located off reservation. In addition, many Native Americans do not have an address on their homes, which makes filling out a registration form more difficult. As a result, over 1/3 of Native Americans are not registered to vote. But there is hope. Just a little over 2 years ago, on March 7, 2021, President Biden issued an important executive order directing federal agencies to accept NVRA designation where feasible. This EO has a potentially profound impact on Indian country, given how often Native governments and people interact with federal agencies. Providing registration at federal facilities can have a huge positive impact on Native American registration rates. We're excited to have on our panel a leader who has answered the call, Secretary of State of New Mexico, Maggie Toulouse Oliver, who has led the way on designations. Secretary Oliver is a leader in modernizing the voter registration system in New Mexico and has specifically worked to include Native Americans by developing a Native American task force. She's been a critical partner in many efforts to increase registration opportunities for Native Americans. And thank you, Secretary Oliver, for joining us today. Additionally, we have specifically identified IHS and Native-run 638 compact IHS facilities as the most profound opportunity to transform registration rates in Indian country. Imagine going into IHS, you're already filling out forms, and you have an opportunity to register with a person who can help you if you have an untraditional address or if a community member that's familiar to you. We also have a panelist, Chairwoman of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok, Regina Cuellar, who will give comments on her tribe's efforts to designate a tribally run health center into an NVRA designated site and offer registration. Chairwoman Cuellar has been providing transformative leadership for her people, and we thank you so much for being here with your busy schedule. Finally, we have two GOTV activists and leaders, Saundra Mitrovich with NCAI and Judith Blanc, the Director of Native Organizers Alliance, who will answer questions about the impact of these registration opportunities on our communities. We're so excited and pleased for this webinar today and hope that we will have an opportunity to transform Indian country registration rates. So now I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Oliver to provide some helpful remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Jacqueline. Good afternoon, everybody. I am incredibly honored and pleased to be part of this panel discussion today, and I promise to be as brief as possible. First of all, I'm extremely excited to announce, for those who aren't aware, that we just had an incredibly successful legislative session here in New Mexico. And a huge part of that success was that we finally got over the finish line after 2 years of trying the Native American Voting Rights Act codified into our election code here in New Mexico, the first of its kind at the state level in this country. And among the many things that this particular piece of legislation does is it acknowledges and frankly embraces the sovereignty and the importance of allowing our tribal communities, particularly our rural tribal communities, to have a say in things like where polling locations are located in their communities, how much early voting they want to have in their communities, the ability to situate secured monitored drop boxes to allow our tribal members who live on tribal land to drop an absentee ballot and not have to deal with the constant challenges of mail service delivery in our rural tribal communities. And I'm really proud to announce, and this is sort of a perfect segue into talking about voter registration, that we are also now making it clear in law that here in New Mexico, a rural tribal voter can use a tribal government location as a mailing address to receive a ballot through the mail. We know, in New Mexico and in some other states, but, we acknowledge the challenges of sort of residency addresses and mail delivery here in our state. And we've always allowed our tribal rural voters to be able to use, draw a map, non-standard addressing, and other ways to describe where they live that are not standard addressing options. But what has been challenging is, well, then where do these folks get their mail at the end of the day? So if they want to get a voter registration through the mail, if they want to get a ballot through the mail or an application, how do we do that in a consistent, successful way for those voters that don't have that kind of access? So I'm really proud here in New Mexico that we've now codified that. Going into this designation of federal facilities, and particularly potentially IHS facilities, I think is going to make a huge difference in our state. I happen to be a New Mexican because my dad went into the Indian Health Service as a young doctor and was stationed in the Navajo Nation out of Gallup, New Mexico. So I have my actual roots in the Indian Health Service here in our state. And I know from the experience of growing up an IHS doctor's daughter that many of our tribal members, sometimes the only in-person contact they have with government is at those IHS facilities, providing those much needed health services. This may be the only way in some cases that folks can register to vote or get a voter registration update completed. So I am hopeful of designating IH facilities here in New Mexico as voter registration sites, national voter registration agencies, and working together with those facilities, as we do always in partnership with our tribal communities, our tribal governments, and leaders throughout the state. And so with that, I just want to thank you again, Jacqueline and NCAI, for having me. I'm excited to hear from the other panel members and happy to answer any questions as we go through the discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks so much. And I'm excited. We had join us as well, Senior Advisor to Secretary of the Interior, Heidi Totticini. Heidi has been an absolute leader in federal designations of facilities. She is at the forefront of the executive order. And it's one of the few times that Native led organizations are leading across a federal mandate to all agencies. And that's thanks to her hard work to get facilities designated through the Department of Interior. So now I'm going to turn it over to Senior Advisor Heidi Todeschini for some remarks.
Yes, Heidi Todeschini, UNESCIA. Hi, everybody. My name is Heidi Todeschini. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation.
Sorry, Heidi, I think we might have lost some audio on you for a second.
Oh, no.
Oh, there you're back.
Ooh, sorry about that. My name is Heidi Todeschini, and I just want to say hello from Washington, D.C. on the ancestral homelands of the Anacostia and Piscataway people. Really happy to be here today just to highlight some of the work that we're doing on our end to advance voting rights work and the historic work that Secretary Haaland is leading for this administration to make permanent changes to access at the ballot box. It means a lot to me to be here today and help to push this forward for our community. And I welcome all tribal leaders, organizations, and everyone here on the line who are working tirelessly on the ground to help expand our work on this level. The work that we're all doing today to ensure everybody can participate in our democratic process is critical and also advances the work that of those who came before us, like Miguel Trujillo, a World War II veteran from the Pueblo of Isleta, who sued the state of New Mexico in 1948. So Native Americans could have the right to vote, which we enjoy today. Even with Miguel Trujillo's victory, states like Utah and North Dakota continue to prevent Native Americans living on reservations the right to vote until the late 1950s. And if you do the breakdown on the math, that's about 60 years ago. So it's been a pretty short time frame for us. Miguel Trujillo exemplifies the legacy of too many American citizens in this country, a legacy of standing up to injustice to access the fundamental right to vote. And that's part of our fight that we're doing today. And this continuation of Miguel Trujillo's legacy has not been lost on Secretary Haaland, now that she's head of the Department of the Interior as our first Native American cabinet secretary in the United States. As an organizer for nearly 2 decades, Secretary Haaland spent countless hours in Indian country to register voters, knock doors, and make phone calls so Native American people could carry out our rights equally. During the 2020 election, more than 11,000 new Native voters were registered across the United States, but we still have more work to do. And I've seen this firsthand growing up in a border town in New Mexico next to the Navajo Nation, where my family's from. Right now, we have the momentum to ensure that Native communities across our country can fully participate in the voting process and make their voices heard in the full democratic process. This is why Secretary Haaland continues the legacy that our leaders have taught us, that voting is not just important, but voting is our power. President Biden and Vice President Harris have taken significant time and effort to expand access and resources to voting for all Americans, and especially in Indian country and through the resources of our federal agencies. In furtherance of the President Biden's executive order to promote access to voting, the Department of the Interior is the first agency in history to designate voter registration sites under the National Voter Registration Act. While this act has been signed into law for nearly 30 years, last year, the Interior became the first federal agency to designate a voter registration agency to distribute voter information, applications, register local voters, and ensure applications are transmitted to the appropriate officials. And I just want to say a special thank you to New Mexico Secretary of State, Maggie Tuis Oliver, who's on the line today, for helping us in one of the 2 states to get this work done. Not only is Interior the first federal agency to accomplish this, but it also directly benefits Indian country because we have designated our BIE post-secondary institutions, including Haskell Indian Nations University in Kansas and the Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute in New Mexico as these sites, which are the 2 tribal colleges that DOI operates. And by expanding access to voting at both Haskell and SIPI, the Interior is taking one more step to empower Native communities to participate in the election outcomes that we've been historically left out of. And despite the persistent barriers that have left our people from voting, tribal communities directly benefit from these services and getting the access to this information as well. This is because the trust responsibility in the federal government has, with tribal nations, established through treaty negotiations and the loss of life that our families have sacrificed throughout time. And this is why voting is sacred to our communities. The designation of SIPI and Haskell is the first step here at Interior, but hope that our work is a model for other agencies to expand access to voting at other places like the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, at IHS facilities, and other places that are helped operated by the federal agencies. Leaders like Miguel Trujillo and Secretary Holland are only the beginning of a larger American story that we can all contribute to. And those stories will be told by the officials that we choose to elect. We can exercise our sacred right to vote, to be led by leadership who understands our priorities and challenges, and further break the cycle of disenfranchisement for all of our communities. But it's up to you to vote, and that decision alone is yours. I hope we all leave behind a legacy that demands accountability and further inspires change. And I really appreciate being here today to help highlight what the Interior is doing to elevate this issue with our federal family, and just really appreciate seeing everybody on the line, and big thank you to everybody's help for helping us get this done. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much, Heidi. We are really inspired by Secretary Holland's leadership, prioritizing designation and making it happen at Haskell and SIPI. And thank you so much, Secretary Oliver, for facilitating the designation at SIPI. And that's really what it's about. It's about getting a Secretary of State that uses their leadership, that has, an intention to create more voter registration opportunities. And here, the federal agency, through President Biden's executive order, and the agency following through to make sure that registration opportunities are going to take place. So we really appreciate that partnership between the two of you. Thank you. So now we're going to turn to Chairwoman Cuellar. Like I said, Chairwoman Cuellar is a passionate advocate for civic engagement in her tribal community. She has led the way for 638 compacting tribes to have their tribally run facilities seek designation. Chairwoman Cuellar has been such a tremendous partner in making sure and taking the leadership to push the tribe and the IHS facility to accept designation. So we're really thrilled. Thank you so much, Chairwoman.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and hello to everybody on the webinar today. Wenamoko, good day. My name is Regina Cuellar, and I am the Chairwoman for the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. I am here today to share a bit about why my tribe is pursuing designation of our tribal health facility as a voter registration site. I would like to thank NARF, NCAI, and Demos for their support throughout this process and making this opportunity possible. As a tribal leader, I am very familiar with the barriers our members face when trying to vote. While many, if not the majority, of the members in my community are highly involved in their own tribal elections and governance, the lack of dedicated voter registration assistance and voting sites in our area prevents many from being involved to the same extent in state and federal elections. This is problematic as it prevents our people from having a voice in the decisions that affect our land, our children, our education, and more, a critical function for a sovereign nation. For these reasons and more, I know it is crucial to bring more voter registration opportunities to places where tribal people are directly located. My tribe is proud to run its own health and wellness center, providing thousands of community members each year with high quality health care right here on the Rancheria. We are the primary and in many cases, the exclusive healthcare provider for our tribal membership, making the health and wellness center an integral part of our members' lives. In addition to being staffed by tribal and other community members that our people know and trust, these factors make our health facility an ideal place to offer high quality voter registration services. I bet the same is true for health centers in other Native communities as well too. I know the tribal members I represent care deeply about engaging with and influencing the decisions that affect their lives. That's why they are so engaged in our tribal elections and governance here at home. As their leader, I have a responsibility to facilitate the civic engagement and as a vital community institution. I believe our health facility can help by making registering to vote in elections beyond the Rancheria easier and more accessible. strengthening our sovereignty, not only at home, but in state and federal decision-making. So far, the process for designation has been simple and straightforward. After indicating our interest to NARF, their staff facilitated meetings and a visit from the Secretary of State's office and the tribe to discuss designation. We talked about what designation will look like in practice and how to seamlessly integrate it into our facility's workflow without affecting patients' quality of care or creating privacy concerns. For voter registration opportunities to feel right to our community, cultural competency and understanding is key. The members of my tribe will feel more comfortable registering to vote if other members of the community are assisting them through the process and helping them fill out the forms. Like many other tribes in Indian country, homes may or may not have a home address, and this can make filling out forms that ask for a home address tricky. Staff at our facility will have the right training to be able to assist and support them in these instances thanks to NARF. While it's been some work to get to this point, I and the rest of the tribe are incredibly excited about this designation and are once again thankful to the support of NARF, NCAI, and demos. This is another step in bolstering the tribal sovereignty and securing our voice within a democracy and ensuring the health and wellness of our tribal communities for generations to come. I genuinely recommend all tribal representatives present today to reach out to NARF and ask about voter registration assistance and see what is possible in your communities. And again, I thank you so much for this opportunity to be here and just to see all the great things that are happening across the different states. And again, thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. We're so inspired by your leadership. And I think, really digging into the process, it's been sort of inspiring, really, to see that, if you've got a passion for civic engagement, that there are opportunities. And it's wonderful to have you be the model going forward for other states that run their 638 IHS facilities, that there are opportunities. And I should mention, in that process, you just goes directly as a tribe exercising your sovereign authority. You go directly to the Secretary's office, and that's just a direct relationship. And so we're able to facilitate that if you need that type of help at NARF. And so really those transactions can go pretty smoothly. So we're really excited for you all, and thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask some questions to sort of the organizers on the ground, the folks that know these barriers so well and that have done so much to improve registration and voting opportunities. So Saundra, turning to you, NCAI was one of the first Native organizations to endorse designations. How do you think designations will impact Indian country? And why should tribes pursue designations versus other forms of voter registration?
Well, first and foremost, Nimwenen, to everybody on the call, thank you. Saundra Mitrovich, the Director of External Engagement here at NCAI, and I also lead in our civic engagement work. It is definitely something that I walked into passionately and got to meet with all of these coalition members. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I'm just very excited to be on the call with everyone here that's doing this work. 1944, when NCAI set forth its first gathering in Denver, Colorado, and looked at some of its first priority work, voting was one of those pieces. It's been a part of our organization going into our 80th year celebration and beyond. But it definitely wasn't the first time I know that our ancestors thought about our ability to have this right to vote, to be able to be a voice in everything related to our community. So thinking about the designations and how that impacts Indian country, I wanted to at least provide some information, some data for folks that I know we've kind of mentioned some of those numbers. And just thinking about some of those significant gaps that we can fill with designations and voter access. 2.6 million American Indians and Alaska Natives are served by federally and tribally run Indian health facilities. That's from the Department of Health and Human Services. If you think about the sheer number of in reaching 2.6 million people, you know that that's also not completely reflective of who those people will also in their families be impacted by voter designation, whether that's when we think about IHS facilities, as we've mentioned, pass through discussions and voting, but just that idea of health and voting. And I know we're going to kind of tie those pieces together a little bit later in this panel, but just that opportunity of voicing a vote in healthcare and just talking through those health disparities, I think is super crucial to know those numbers. Additionally, I just wanted to put out too that if additional voter registrations are generated, and this is actually a Demos estimate, which I think is a really great estimate for us to think about, is 270,000 additional voter registrations could be generated if those high quality voter registration services are offered across all 638 and IHS facilities. And I think that was super crucial, that number to think through. And so when you think about your local elections, you think about all of those opportunities for impact. Having those additional voters that are looking at their communities and voicing what they think is reflective of the needs, it can change the course of action and some of their reflect in their local elections. And then going into some of the other numbers, 17.7 million students submitting FAFSA forms. And Tufts University put out a recent report that talked through this about the level of engagement of youth and the level of engagement of youth in our communities, including American Indian Alaska Native communities. There were 67% of those college youth, those students, that said civic participation was high on their list of what they were focused on and areas of work that were needed, that they wanted to engage in. And so when we start to think through all of these numbers and how that impacts American Indian Alaska Native communities, we start to think about the messaging. We start to think about, when you talk about on the ground work, how are we working within our communities, alongside our communities, to do this? And we all know that all of our communities have different challenges, have different needs, may have different coalitions in cohorts. We obviously heard about New Mexico. I've been very blessed to work alongside some folks from New Mexico Native Vote this week, and everyone has different capacity to do this work. But our goal in this coalition with NARF and Demos and Native Organizers Alliance and many others is really to bring about the opportunity to fill these gaps and to ensure that, those 64% of American Indian Alaska Native people that were reported being registered to vote during those November 2020 elections, compared to 73% of all voting eligible people. We want that number to go up. And I think that we can make that change, and voter designation will help do that. The second part of your question was talking about why we should pursue designations versus other forms of voter registration. And I think, Jacqueline, you said this at the outset very well, which is the access to some of the services that are already being provided, and the fact that many American Indian Alaska Native people, that access is just not there for some of them. So having these additional spaces, when you think about IHS being one of the best agencies, has longstanding and persistent, being able to fill the gaps experienced by American Indian Alaska Native communities, I think that would be such a great model. We know that they, again, going back to that number, serving over those 2 million, patients per year, and looking at those that are all voter eligible, it's a high use institution. I worked there in the summer at my local Indian Health Service facility as a youth. And so when you see different people coming in and out in community, it's just such a good opportunity for interaction. Community members are receiving services and benefits. And so that in-person interaction really could have such a major impact. The other thing that's super crucial here is that just simply, we all know this, simply handing out a voter registration form, it's just not enough. We need to make sure that we're translating all of that into actual voting, and that their voters are being added to registration rolls. So we want to make sure people are being walk through this entire registration process, providing assistance, completing forms if voters want that assistance, and then collecting and submitting those completed forms to appropriate election officials, and just really following through and just making sure that people feel like when they voice their vote, that it actually matters and that it's going to be counted. Some other things, and just thinking about this idea of offering kind of robust, voter registration services at IHS facilities. We know that it's not going to happen overnight. We know that it's going to be a process, but I think what you get in that process is kind of what we're seeing here, a collective action of work that will lead into other spaces and places. It will have positive impact in other areas, education, health, as we've already talked about. And also just that collective good in community. And so I always think about, I had mentioned to somebody, I always think about our tribal elections really alongside our local, and state elections, and how people see those kind of interchanging together. And I think this is just one way that we can get a little bit more people engaged, people turning out, people participating. And also, I'm really interested too in even getting more of our Native folks running for office. And so out of this, that also kind of, I think, is another opportunity here. When you get people engaged in this way and they're part of the conversation, they're voting, they're casting a ballot, they're seeing that whole process, maybe they will consider also taking those next steps and running for office. So a lot of impact. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Saundra, for your inspiring work and for those insights. I think one thing I wanted to sort of draw out from your comments, which were so helpful, is, this is a voluntary process, right? Something that we just want to emphasize, that you're going to get the opportunity to register. That doesn't mean that you have to register. It doesn't mean that, that there's going to be any pressure to register one way or another, or to think about. There's no political affiliations that are being associated with this registration opportunity. Instead, what it is just an opportunity to register for folks that may not have been proactively asked to register their entire lives. And so, it's the power to say yes or no. And I think that's a really important part of what NVRA designation means. And then, like all the work gets done on the back end, right? You just fill your form out, you give it to the person that's providing that registration opportunity, and then the facility drops that off to the appropriate county official to get that individual registered. So thanks so much, Saundra, I appreciate that. So turning now to Judith. Judith, thank you so much for your participation. And, from an organizing perspective, why are designations important, and how can organizers work to educate tribal leaders about these opportunities for their communities?
Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for inviting me. We really, at Native Organizers Alliance, we treasure this ecosystem that's growing with DEMOS and tribal leaders and NCAI and NAF, because this is the kind of infrastructure we've needed for some time. And it doesn't come out of, thin air. We have a growing awareness on the ground of the power of voting, that voting creates new conditions in which we live, work, love, and actually are able to make changes in our everyday lives. Native Organizers Alliance, we were founded over a decade ago in mobilizing around the Affordable Care Act. And we realized that there needed to be a place where organizers, tribal leaders, traditional leaders could gather to talk about how do we build community? How do we strengthen our traditional values of community while organizing for change, policy change, to have impact on policy? And I think this designation process opens up an opportunity for long-term political engagement of tribal and Native communities. And this is why. In 2020, we did a survey along with Illuminative, a national survey, over 6,000 Natives, urban and rural and res Indians, about their electoral participation. Over 80% of those who participated in the poll said they either read a candidate's platform or they study the voting record of a candidate. Well, what happened in 2020 is that a majority of Indian people understood the significance of the 2020 election and came out in record numbers. Navajo Reservation had 80% voter turnout. Generally, they have 60%, which is higher than the national average, I might point out, for historically determined reasons, but because they understood they're an educated electorate. That's what the Indian vote was. And now, fresh on the minds at the grassroots is that Deb Haaland, the first Native to lead the Department of Interior, to be in the cabinet, happened because we voted in such large numbers, period, full stop. So when I think about the power of an IHS facility being designated, then I'm thinking about what do the people working on food sovereignty and on educational issues, what do traditional societies, what do they do if they want to be engaged in mobilizing at the grassroots? They face tremendous obstacles at bringing people, in order to get people registered, and then in order to get them to the places, it's tremendously difficult. So this is what the designation does. It gives people the opportunity who are working on the issues and are living under the policies on these issues, like food sovereignty or healthcare, to actually have a place to go where they can register and then become involved in advocacy. Because in the long run, elections come and go, but it's all the advocacy and the work that's done in between elections that is really critical in determining policies. And in a lot of ways, we believe that if our people are engaged in voting and have the opportunity to vote, then it paves the way for us to achieve treaty rights. It paves the way for us to achieve sovereignty. Because sovereignty will not be achieved without a deeply democratic political system and a deeply democratic economic system, a multiracial democracy. And at this moment, where we have so much to do to ensure that a multiracial democracy is a reality. And in Indian country, I think there's a high enough level of awareness of what transpired after the 2020 elections that these designations will experience an explosive number of people coming in to register, and that we can then mobilize traditional societies, food sovereignty groups, the people who are doing, the care of buffalo herds, the daycare workers, to go to that designated place, to register to vote, and then to talk about the issues that they confront in their work. So I'm very excited about the work that NAF is doing and the tribal leaders who are moving this forward, but we have to have a full court press. Multiracial democracy is on the ballot in 2024, and that is not the end game. The end game is our people feeling the power of collective action and our voices being heard with one heart, one mind, pushing for policies that can make a difference in our everyday life.
Thank you so much, Judith. What inspiring words. And I think such an important perspective that we all remember what we're fighting for here, right? And why I think these registration opportunities have been historically kept from Native people. And that's because these registration opportunities are powerful. And we have the ability to use that power to transform our communities. And registration at IHS, I think, really has the opportunity to be, Indian country's DMV registration, right? We saw the explosive registration rates after the 1993 NVRA, right? When folks were asked about registration in a transaction that they care about, getting their license, an everyday, nuisance that you have to go through, they were willing to say, yeah, I want to register. It was easy. And it was also served, I think, as an invite, right? That this is integrated into a part of your life that you are experiencing every day because you are an American citizen that is a part of this body politic. And so we are inviting you to participate. But in Indian country didn't get that, right? And I think, in federal agencies where we're already interacting, and especially at 638 compacting facilities where we've got control and we've got tribally run healthcare facilities that people trust, and we've got tribal people that are running those facilities and that are interacting with folks, community members. What an opportunity to extend that invite to Native people and to our people, so we can grasp that power that Judith was talking about. So thank you so much. So now we're going to do just some quick questions. Secretary Oliver, turning to you, seeking designation can be an intimidating process, right? It seems like this paperwork, it's got, this like formal, type of designation. As a secretary, does a state partner have experience with designation, and can a secretary help facilities that are looking to provide registration services?
Sure. Well, in my state, obviously, we already have SIPI, which is very exciting as a to learn from state partner. But our office is, very outwardly oriented. We want to encourage, we want to help facilitate, and we always, there's no such thing as a dumb question, right? If you've never done something before, we may not know the answer either, right? But we're going to help figure it out. And through the establishment of the Native American Voting Task Force here in my state, where we have representation from all three federally designated Apache tribes, our Pueblos, and the Navajo Nation. We also have that local leadership, local tribal leaders from and within the community who work together closely and liaise with my office, who can also work together with the facilities and the leadership of those facilities in community. So it doesn't necessarily have to be me or my staff, even though we do have, Native folks on my staff intentionally, to work within and among the communities that they are from. But we also have this extension of leadership through our tribal Native American Voting Task Force. So we have many different, in my state, we have many different pathways to receive that assistance and those suggestions, those helpful tips. And even at the end of the day, if we need to call someone to help get a facility designated. The other piece that I want to add, and something we're really focused on here in my state, although it may not exist in other states, we're trying to talk about how to do this. It's still, it's one of those things where we're still learning how to do it right. As I always say, I'm a white girl from Albuquerque. I don't want to come into a tribal community and tell that community what is culturally and language appropriate in that community. I want that community, if they're willing and would like to tell me what they need. So that's the other piece, right? We can develop training materials and we can develop Q&As and we can do all of those things, but we want to do that in partnership, not as a top-down approach, but as a collaborative approach. We can bring the knowledge, the expertise, and the infrastructure working within and among community members to make sure that it's done in a way that's culturally appropriate. Because at the end of the day, we can establish and provide these services, but if they're being done in a way that's very top down and not an acknowledgement of and embracing of the traditions, the values, the norms, and the language of that community, that isn't going to be a successful program. So those are the types of things that we want to do and want to model, and we're just actively extending invitations if there are communities and facilities within those communities that do want to work with us through these multiple pathways.
Thanks so much. And, I think it's something that's helpful to know that, secretaries' offices, even though it's new to you, it's not going to be new to them, right? You guys have designations in a whole variety of agencies, and you're required already federally to offer registration at DMVs and the like. And so there are procedures that exist. So it's about getting on that pipeline that many states already have. And thank you so much for being such a conducive pipeline. We really appreciate it. So Heidi, turning to you real quick, you've had the experience of guiding registration through 2 states. Can you explain a bit about that process and how that process differed between the states?
Yes, not a problem. So one thing that was interesting in being the first is that there is no process or established procedure to kind of look to figure out how to go about doing this. So when we were working to implement it, of course, everything has to be one, we have to work very closely with the state. Because it's all done through state law, and ultimately it's the state's decision in how to best go about this, or if they'd like to go about this. And so through New Mexico, because of the great work Secretary Maggie Toulouse-Oliver has done throughout her career, it was a really easy, streamlined process to get SIPI designated as a voter registration site from our end. And it's been great. It was a quick process. Folks in her office already knew what to do. They turned it around to get SIPI registered and get the information and training packet information over to SIPI. And I know that there's a good relationship as we move forward and as we move along to get the site set up at this point. In Kansas, the state of Kansas, also great. Their team was super helpful in helping us move this along as well. However, because it was one of the first times they had done it, the process was a little unclear on their end and of course on our end. So we really had to work together a little bit more closely to try to figure out what worked best for the state and how to best go about doing that, following state law and the processes that they felt most comfortable in doing that, following the Kansas Constitution. And so with that, we were able to just pull everybody together. The DOI here, their main building here in DC, our schools, and then the state offices to help get that set up. And it did take a little bit of time, but everybody was really great to work with throughout the process. And we got it done. And now, comparatively between SIPI and Haskell, Haskell also had some changes within their administration as well. And so as of right now, everybody's pretty much in the same place, but the process just took a little bit longer. And I think folks are going to experience that regardless what agency you're going through or what state. It just kind of depends on how close your working relationship is with folks and really take the guide or the guidance of the state at that point. So both processes were easy. One just went faster than the other. And I think that that's just something to be cognizant of, to make sure to work closely with the states and make sure that you're adhering to the work that they want to get done and also just following their process because it could be different in every jurisdiction.
Thanks so much. I think it's such an important point, right? This is a state by state, tribe by tribe, facility by facility process, right? And we're here to help, right? You're not alone. That a lot of times both sides of the equation are, figuring out sort of the logistics and how it's going to work. And, that's normal, right? And it may take some time for a facility to work its way through. But once it works its way through, those registrations are really going to start rolling in. And really, if you get 5 new registrations, 50 new registrations, 100 new registrations, that is a success. And also just offering the registration is a success. Extending that invite is a success. And so, it is, we don't want to make it seem like it's a, super quick, process that just, happens overnight. It's about sort of getting new skills and getting everybody to have new skills to be able to provide those meaningful registration opportunities. It's not just sticking a stack of papers. It's also following up to make sure that that registration is correctly filled out so that it actually gets that person registered, and then we have the opportunity to vote down the line. So thank you so much, Heidi, for going through that process twice and being, really the first federal agency to answer the call of the EO. Such a transformative, such an important work, and so we really appreciate it. So turning to you, Chairwoman, we just wanted to ask, whether your 638 compact healthcare facility is overburdened, you think, or will be overburdened by offering registration?
That's a good question. I don't think it's going to be overburdened at all. Yes, there will be some training involved for the staff, the front office staff. But other than that, I don't think it's going to be overburdened. Every year, our front office already does updates, so we're just going to include it in that yearly update. And our computers will flag us and let us know when we need to update that information. So when we have a patient that comes up and, we see that they need to update their information, that's going to be our time to go ahead and ask that question and go ahead and be like, oh, I see, we need to update your information. And here's a form if you'd like to register to vote. That's where we're going to take that opportunity to go ahead and do that. So I don't think it's going to overburden it. It's going to go right into the flow of already the front office staff. And again, it's just really about the training. And and I honestly can say I think this is going to be a win-win for everybody. I mean, like you said, IHS facilities are kind of like the heart of everywhere. And before I became the chairwoman, I worked at our IHS facility, like many of you, and I was the front office manager. So you get to know your community and they get to trust you so much. I mean, I was like a counselor, they would come to me and they'd tell me everything, and it was really great. And you really get to know them and they trust you. Even with this past election, we saw some of our non-tribal community members coming in and asking us about certain policies that were related to tribal communities. And so you see that community and how they want to help and participate. So I think it's a win-win for everybody, and I don't think it's going to be overburdening at all. So I'm excited, like I said, and it was a great question. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for extending this opportunity to your people and for the surrounding communities as well, right? Not just tribal members attend that IHS facility. The surrounding community is benefiting from the quality healthcare you provide and from the civic engagement that's going to happen. And, there's increasing research across the spectrum that shows that health outcomes are really impacted by civic engagement. And so it's really within a facility's interest in serving the health outcomes of its people to offer registration. So I appreciate that so much. And Heidi, I just want to turn back to you real quick. I think you had a point about federal and state forms that I wanted to give you an opportunity to share.
Yeah, thank you. One more thing just to help folks on the line is something that I didn't think about originally, but especially with our students going to Haskell and SIPI, which there's only 2 tribal colleges underneath Interior's jurisdiction. So we're going to get college students from every state in the country. And so in working through this process, the state forms are available, which are easy to access, but also it's important to make available the federal forms where you can register to vote for folks across the country so they don't have to register in that specific state. So just something I wanted to flag there. And then also as time moves along, I think voter registration is also going to be slowly moving to online platforms. And as we know, Indian country is not fully digitally connected, which is a whole nother issue I can go into. But I think it's really important to have all those options available if possible. And then definitely at minimum have the federal and the state forms available there.
Thanks so much. And that expertise is so helpful, right? You've been through the process, all the hiccups, and I really appreciate you sharing. So, I do think, we've got, it's the executive order, right? It applies to all federal agencies. And so there's, multiple opportunities here, the designation of colleges, getting our young people involved in voting. The Department of Agriculture, for example, gives us a lot of our SNAP benefits or, the other types of benefits. And, there's opportunities there to talk to your federal agencies about offering registration. But turning specifically to IHS and 638 compacting facilities, as Chairwoman Cuellar said, so much of that is the heartbeat of a community, right? It's a place where folks are filling out forms regularly, where they're in touch with sort of administrative things, right? And, I think that we are so excited by President Biden's commitment to provide 5 pilot programs at IHS facilities. That is, really important leadership. And so, we are seeking, input into which of those 5 facilities, that pilot program should be at. You can reach out to NARF. And we're also seeking to encourage Director So that this is something that Indian country wants, that we are all unified in this idea that, voting is a important part of health. It's an important part of civic engagement, and that Indian country would like to have those opportunities so that we can have an ease in registration that a lot of our partners and other American citizens have. To that end, we have a petition that you can sign, that you can participate in. And that petition is just directed to Director So and IHS to encourage them to designate those 5 pilot programs and to continue through to the commitment, and also to provide encouragement to 638 compacting facilities to provide that registration opportunity and designation at their facilities. And so we'll provide that link to the petition. We encourage you all to sign on behalf of yourselves and your communities. I also wanted to let you know that you're more than welcome to reach out to NARF. Vote@narf.org if your facility and tribe is interested in seeking federal designation, NVRA designation. We're here to help facilitate that process, and we're happy to provide that opportunity. And so, thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Gosh, what an incredible group of women. I'm so proud to be among you. Secretary Oliver, thank you so much for dedicating a full hour of your time to this important topic. Heidi, thank you so much for your leadership and perseverance. And thank you to Secretary Holland for her absolute leadership in designation. Chairwoman Cuellar, oh my goodness, you have absolutely led the way in your community and providing registration opportunities there. And thank you to Saundra and Judith always for being the real boots in the ground that Indian country deserves. So we're all here excited about this opportunity. We're so thankful for all of the work that it takes to make this happen. And we are looking forward to hearing from you about your participation in providing registration at federal agencies across Indian country. So thank you so much. We will put the link in the chat, and then we will also follow up by email with a link to the petition. Thank you everyone for your participation.